There are over 2 million of us in Australia, small business operators.
Doing what we can to make a go of things
in a pretty tough economic environment.
And a lot of people think that because we're small, we don't matter.
But together, we're too big to ignore.
Help make sure small business gets heard in Canberra this election. Add your voice at toobigtoignore.org.au. Authorised by MLove Campaign for Small Business Canberra.
I always have to wait for that. A little bit at the end, I have to wait for the, authorised by. It always gets me. I've been in the regions and I'm about to jump in with something really, really dynamic and suddenly authorised by. Anyway, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, this morning. Who thinks it's a beautiful morning to get up and make a big noise for business so that Canberra hears it? I really feel bad because most of you would have been doing 10k runs this morning in weather like this, so I'm sorry to drag you away and give you a really fatty breakfast, but you can be forgiven tomorrow. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nigel McBride. I'm the CEO of Business SA here, which is South Australia's peak chamber of commerce. I was going to say cheap. It was a very late night flying back from Sydney last night, ladies and gentlemen, so please forgive me. This is a fantastic opportunity for small business to get together and talk about what really counts. And we're going to hear, and you just heard there, that this sector that you're in, that so many Australians are in, so many South Australians are in, if we're a small business country, certainly South Australia is a small business state within that. And we're very proud of our small business heritage, and we're very proud of what we do for the economy. But we do know that there are some huge issues that are facing small business, and we're going to talk about those this morning. But just before we go to that, want to welcome Steve Georgianis. Thank you, Steve, for coming. Steve has to rush off to a primary school event shortly, but we appreciate you making the time, and hopefully you'll get some time in the next few days to talk to small business. Matt Williams is an apology. We asked both sides of politics, the main parties of politics, to come along. Apparently Tony Abbott's doing a swift trip into town, and that was unannounced and we didn't know about it. And Matt's given his apologies. He would have loved to have been here, but he's got to go with the boss, and they're doing something this morning. I want to welcome my colleague Peter Anderson, who we'll be hearing from later, and special guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to have you here. Now, some housekeeping. Please take out your mobile phones, look at them admiringly, and then turn them off or turn them to vibrate. Bathrooms is just straight out the back there. And in the event of an emergency, there are green signs. I say this quite often: if in the event of emergency, just follow me. I'll be running screaming out that door, so you'll know where to go. Now, there are some fantastic door prizes at the end of this. So if you haven't put your business card in, grab a friend's business card and write your name on it. As they say in politics, vote early and vote often for the business card draw. So some great prizes later on. Okay, I just want to make a few points about what's been going on nationally. This morning is part of a national campaign we've been running as a chamber movement right across this country. Every state and territory has been running breakfasts like this, been doing social media and been promoting this, because we believe this is a pivotal time for small business in this country. We believe a small business has been over-regulated, overtaxed and overlooked. And for those of you who feel like that, you're not alone. Many, many small businesses right across this country feel like there's too many layers of taxation. There's federal, state and local taxation effectively and levies. There is an enormous amount of red tape that small businesses face. And of course it's harder and harder to employ people when you want to. So we want to change all of that, and that's the messages we want to send out. So 2 million smaller businesses employ 7 million Australians. That's bigger than the mining sector. It's bigger than the banking sector. And yet in Canberra you don't seem to see too many small businesses getting invited to sit around at the big table. You see the big banks and the big mining companies. And there's nothing wrong with banks and mining companies. It's just that we need to give an equal voice to small business. We really feel that if we could just get small business really confident, we would change our economy in a way that other things wouldn't change it. You can imagine that if every small business in Australia felt confident to just employ one more a fellow Australian, our unemployment would come to an end. Isn't that an extraordinary thing? 2 million small businesses employing just one more worker, and unemployment would cease to exist. And that's the power of the small business sector. When a big business makes 100 people redundant, on the flip side of the coin, it makes front page news. But when 20 small businesses have to chop 5 jobs, it never gets a mention. And this is the sort of lack of visibility that we want to really address in this campaign. And I'm really proud to say that, and Peter just mentioned it in his online thing the other day, that he got up the other morning and felt fantastic because both leaders on both sides of politics have started to talk in the terms of this campaign. When we started this campaign some months ago, and we're on day 146, people didn't want to know. But every single chamber in the Peak Chamber of Commerce and our industry associations have got out there and pushed this and pushed it. And now just the other day, for example, Kevin Rudd's talking about small business packages, talking about really launching a small business strategy. That wasn't even in his vocabulary at that time, nor was it, to be fair, really high on the opposition's agenda either, but we've taken it there and we're very proud of that. And that means that thousands upon thousands of small businesses have added their voices to this campaign so that we are too big to ignore, and we've proven that on both sides of politics. So give yourselves a hand for that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, this morning's not about long speeches, but I just want to pick up a couple of things. We, as I said, we're at day 146 of this campaign. We've got nearly 100,000 active voices. That's people who've gone on our website and said, I want to add my voice. When you go into Canberra and say, we've got 100,000 voices who are saying we need to do something for small business, it's surprise, surprise, politicians listen. Isn't that right, Steve? It's pretty compelling, isn't it? We've used social media because this is a grassroots campaign. We don't have a mega $1 million budget to go out there and run big television ads. This is a grassroots social media campaign online, and yes, we've done what we can on radio and in the Times and in the Business Journal in this state, but right across the country, it's about word of mouth, it's about people getting on board, and very much that was always the plan, to go. And if we could mobilise this large group of Australians out there who have risked everything to create a small business to actually make jobs available for fellow Australians, if we could really make small business the hero of this campaign, then we'd see people, not only politicians, but right across every industry sector, begin to understand, the heroes of our economy being small business. Now, we're delighted that in this state you guys have come on board, but can I just say there's a pamphlet at your table if somebody can pick it up and wave it around in the front. Thanks, Rick. No, it's the other one, the small one. All right. Now, that's a little flyer that says this is what you can do. You may not have come on board yet with this, but there's time. And by the way, once this election's over, we've got another election coming up. So the Small Business Too Big to Ignore campaign will roll on beyond next Saturday, this Saturday. We will be running this right up to the state election, because it doesn't matter whether you're in federal government or in state government, we want to ensure in South Australia that small businesses aren't ignored, and we'll continue to build that campaign. As I said before, I've spent a lot of time going out to the regions, and we've taken this theme of small business too big to ignore to, I've personally taken to the Barossa, Clare, Whyalla, Mount Gambier, Port Lincoln, Port Pirie. And it is tough running a small business, but when you get out into the regions, you really know things are tough when people just thank you for coming. Our regions do feel completely disconnected from a highly urbanised metro economy, where all of the economic focus seems to be on Adelaide. And I just think of the statistics again, that if every regional small business could take on just 1 or 2 apprentices, how that would change youth unemployment out in the country, how that would keep young people in those country towns that we so desperately need to keep alive. Because if we let our regional economy die, this state isn't going anywhere fast. And once again, one of the great things that we're saying is, why are we making it so difficult for businesses to take on young people? Why is it so expensive? why are the incentives for apprentices and trainees not what they used to be, and we wonder why we've got such high youth unemployment. So what we need to do is we need to make it much easier for small businesses to do things with apprentices and trainees in this state, and we're going to work tirelessly to make sure that we do all we can. We're going to go to breakfast in a minute and let you network and say hi to your colleagues and friends across the tables. Do feel free to move around and say g'day. Please enjoy the breakfast and the networking. Please remember to make sure your card's in there, because there's an iPad. Apparently my 10 cards were taken out of the bowl, so, you know, it's been you. But we'll be back shortly. Please enjoy breakfast and see you very soon. Thank you.
Why does small business need your help to make a big noise in 2013? Because it's the only way we'll get heard in Canberra. Make no mistake, Australia is the land of the small business. There are 2 million small businesses here, and they employ more than 7 million Australians. That's just over 60% of our workforce. Small business is not just the lifeblood and backbone of our economy, it's the brains, the heart, the soul. They're the real entrepreneurs, the risk takers, the job creators. Yet they're ignored, overtaxed and over-regulated, trapped in red tape and taken for granted. Your support for small business will make sure we're heard in Canberra. Whoever takes small business seriously gets our vote. So let's send the message loud and clear. Small business is too big to ignore. Add your voice at toobigtoignore.org.au.
Please, it's great to hear you guys have not lost your voices and you're talking to each other. It's fantastic. It's lovely to see the table down the front here. You've got the sort of the front row for the fantastic show there. Welcome again for those of you who have arrived since we started. Can I just say, first of all, before I introduce our first speaker today, thank you to our members, Business SA members here today. We could not do what we do without your support. We're really delighted that just the other day we crossed the 5,000 member threshold in this state, and we're just delighted that we have so much support, but we want to increase that support. There is no such thing, ladies and gentlemen, as a free breakfast, you know that. And if either political party tells you there's a free breakfast, well, what can we say? I just want the people who look after people who want to talk to about membership to stand up in the room. Guys, if you want to stand up and smile and turn around. And so these are our people who would like to speak to you about membership if you're not a member, and no commitment, just we'll lock the doors before you leave and we'll see how you go. Thank you very much, guys. It's my absolute pleasure to invite to the stage now Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Peter Anderson. As Chief Executive of Australia's peak business organisation, Peter speaks at a national and international level on behalf of all state and territory chambers of commerce, 30 national industry associations and more than 300,000 small, medium and large businesses across all business sectors. Peter is the Australian business representative regionally and globally at international forums such as the OECD, the International Chamber of Commerce and the International Organisation of Employers. He's also director of the Australian Made, Australian Grown campaign. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Good morning to ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for supporting Business SA. That's the first thing I want to say to you. Business SA, as I first knew it as the South Australian Employers Chamber of Commerce and Industry, has in its DNA, to use an expression that politicians use a lot, a deep commitment to and support for the work of the South Australian economy. And as we know here in South Australia, and as being a South Australian boy myself, the overwhelming component of the South Australian economy are small and medium businesses. And it's been something which Business SA has been deeply committed to since I first walked into 12 Perry Street in 1984 and started one of my first jobs on the same floor as Business SA. And over the years I've seen how deeply the organisation and its members have worked on behalf of business interests and private sector interests in the state. And Nigel and his team have been such fantastic contributors to the Small Business Too Big to Ignore campaign. And look what we've got here. We've got over 180 South Australian business people and their supporters in the room at a Small Business Too Big to Ignore event, right on the cusp of a federal election, making sure that the voice of South Australian business people is indeed heard in Canberra in this election year. Welcome also to Steve Georgianis. Thank you very much for coming along, Steve, to this morning's breakfast. I work in my daily life in Canberra with so many federal members of Parliament. I know that they have tremendous commitments on their time, but the best federal members of Parliament are those who are close to their community and are able to represent the voice of business people in the governments and in the political parties that they are members of. I myself am not a small business person. I'm not gutsy enough to be a small business person, to be completely frank with you. That's probably why I went to law school down at Adelaide Uni in the late 70s and early 80s. But I learnt a lesson here in South Australia about small business at that very time. We're in a federal election year here in 2013, but I just want to take you back for a very brief moment to 1977. I was 17 years old. I lived in Renown Park where I grew up. Just outside your electorate, Steve? Just outside. And my dad was a voter. My mum wasn't a voter. She was a conscientious objector on religious grounds. But my dad was a voter, and I went with my dad to the polling booth, which was in the suburb of Brompton. And we never talked politics at home. It wasn't something that we discussed, but when Dad got back into the car after having voted in Hawker Street, Brompton, I said something to him that I'd never said before and never said since, or subsequently, before he passed away. I said, "Dad, who did you vote for?" And he looked at me, we're sitting in the Holden, he turned around to me and he said, "Son, I voted for the person who would do the best thing for the little man," quote unquote. That was my first lesson in life, that the little man or the little woman mattered. And it stayed with me right until this day. Because the truth of the matter is that the silent majority of the Australian economy is comprised of the little men and the little women, the people who are actually creating the economy. And at the heart of the Small Business Too Big to Ignore campaign is a desire to create the tools that give voice to the silent majority in our local suburbs, our local communities and our local towns. So when we devised the concept, when Nigel, myself and our fellow Chamber of Commerce leaders around the country sat down and devised the concept back in January of the Small Business Too Big to Ignore campaign for this election year, we knew one thing about what makes campaigns work, and that is they have to be grounded in a core truth. And this campaign is grounded in a core truth. Small business people are indeed too big to ignore. Their voice is the voice of the silent majority that make our local communities what they are. And there are deep frustrations with the way in which governments, plural, have dealt with them, and in many respects, willingly or unwillingly, taken their enterprise for granted, seeing them as convenient cash cows, over-regulating, overtaxing, and not engaging them in a meaningful way in the big decisions that affect their business that governments and politicians make. And that critique is a critique that cuts right across political boundaries. It has been a sense of frustration that has built up over many years with the way the systems of government work. It's not just politicians or political parties that are subject to that criticism. I see it in the way in which the bureaucracies work, and bureaucracies make decisions, and the detachment that bureaucracies, particularly in Canberra, can have, wittingly and unwittingly, from the circumstances, particularly of small and medium business people, and the compounding nature of regulation. So when we put together this campaign, we knew we were dealing with a core truth. There's two messages I want to communicate to you this morning. One is a word of encouragement, and one is a request. The word of encouragement is that this campaign is having a real impact. The capacity of small and medium business people to impact national public affairs can seem very distant when you are in your shop, when you're in your office, when you're in your manufacturing plant dealing with the problems of the day. But by combining together and using the respected authority of organisations like Business SA, I'm here to tell you here in Adelaide this Tuesday before our federal election week that you are making an impact. Let me give you a couple of examples. We launched this campaign in Sydney on the 10th of April. We didn't know how many people would turn up. A week out, the numbers were looking good. I was told at 300, 500 perhaps. We had to delay the start of the launch by half an hour because 700 people queued up at 7 o'clock in the morning to sit in a room like this, and so they wanted to be part of this message. We have subsequently been able to get a significant degree of connection with the major political parties that are seeking to form the Australian government. We have independent commentators now talking about this being an election period where they have not seen the politicians contest for the small business constituency in any previous election campaign in Australia. And that is because a voice of the silent majority is being registered. A couple of examples. Mr Abbott, when he gave his budget reply speech in 16th of May, said that his government, if elected, or his party, if elected to government, would suspend superannuation levy obligations of the business community for a couple of years in order to help support the economy during a period of transition. His party released its red tape and regulation policy on the 8th of July. Mr Rudd at the National Press Club, when he assumed the leadership of his party back at the end of June, 8th of July, set out a 7-pillar agenda for national productivity, and one of those pillars was an agenda and a plan to support small business people. It had registered at the highest levels of the Australian government. And then we've seen announcements by Mr Rudd and Mr Abbott during the official election campaign, multiple announcements about small business issues. And Nigel made an allusion to something that I put out the other day on Sunday morning, 6:30am. I'm not usually, feeling good about politics at 6:30am on a Sunday, but I switched on the ABC radio just before I jumped on my bicycle, and the ABC was reporting that Mr Rudd's election campaign would be centred with a message around small business and jobs. And I thought, yeah, we're cutting through. We are cutting through into the highest levels of our political parties, recognising that they need to frame messages in this election year around the small business constituency and what we call the big 4 issues you can't ignore. And you've all got a brochure here on your table, the big 4 you can't ignore. What we have done with the big 4 you can't ignore is to identify from our research and our feedback and our engagement with small business people 4 of the most critical issues affecting small businesses. They're independent, you're independent. You're spread out, you're disparate, you're in different industries, you have different circumstances, and that makes it challenging to pull together issues which you all commonly want to stand on. But that was our challenge. And that's what organisations like Nigel's organisation and ours do. We bring you together and give some coherence to your voice. And the big four you can't ignore are not the only four issues that are of importance to small business, but they're four of the real big ones. Cut down on the red tape. And we've got some specific examples as to where we want that to occur. Simplify the tax system. It's a system that is actually beyond the comprehension of even professionals in the field, let alone small business people who are required to comply. Thirdly, make it easier to employ people. Make it easier to employ people. And fourthly, build better infrastructure. Why? Because small business people are part of local communities. You are local communities. And you are working inside infrastructure that needs to be as supportive to your economic needs as it is to our needs as individuals in our community to move around. So these were four big issues that we put forward. And on each of those issues, in some respects to greater degrees, in some respects to lesser degrees, there have been specific commitments coming from the political parties, the major parties, and even some of the minor parties and independents on these matters. And we've been tallying them up, and we've been talking to the parties, and it's been a tremendous experience to challenge them, not just with individual announcements, but challenge them with plans and ideas to actually do what should be in the obvious interests of those that want to form government, and that is to build the capability of the private sector. Because the more you build the capability of the private sector, the less burden that falls on government to have to do heavy lifting to lift living standards in the community. So the campaign is working, and I want to encourage you in that respect. The voice that has been expressed is cutting through. There's so many contested voices in Canberra, so many different voices hitting people like Steve Georgianis and Matt Williams and others here in the electorate of Hindmarsh, let alone nationally. So many different voices from lobby groups here and lobby groups there. But you're not just a lobby group. You actually are the heartbeat of the local economy. And that's why you're cutting through. So that's my encouragement to you. But my request is to support this campaign in tangible ways. Nigel has mentioned that if you pick up this card, it's, we're all going to go to a polling place on Saturday and you get, how to vote cards. Well, it's a bit like a how to support card. There's things you can do which are pretty straightforward, but you can do them and be part of a combined effort to be seen to be making a noise. I am astonished that there are 96,900 voices of support on our social media hub through this campaign. I'm not someone who is naturally a glass half full. I tend to be naturally a warrior. But when I was told that we had a chance of reaching 100,000 voices by election day in support of this campaign, I was astonished to think that that was possible. But it is now actually a real possibility with what is happening around the country in this week, with events such as this. So if you want to be one of those 4,000 voices that can pull us up, or 3,100 voices that can pull us up over the course of the next 4 days to actually have this enormous six-figure level of support in the campaign, please get on the website and register your support. The final thing I want to say is that this campaign is completely authentic. The people you've seen on the videos and on the advertising, and you hear on the advertising, are not actors. They are real small business people. I said I'm not a small business person because I'm not gutsy enough. They are the gutsy people. They've been prepared to put their name, their picture, their business on the line to say they're going to stand up and be seen and be named and be subject to whatever flack might come their way to support this. And I salute them here in a very public way. But we want your support, not just until, to send a message until Saturday. At the heart of this campaign has been the frustration that governments of whatever political colours have not actually implemented better frameworks for small business people. And that means that whoever is elected to govern the country of Australia on Saturday is going to be challenged with the implementation objectives that we set out in our small business campaign. It will continue beyond, as Nigel said, because there's also state elections to be had, but there is an enormous amount of change that needs to occur at a national level, not just with politicians, but with the way the bureaucracy deals with the small business and the private sector constituency. That's going to be our challenge. So we'll be working strongly in the months that occur after next Saturday, whether it's a government led by Mr Rudd or a government led by Mr Abbott, to make sure that your voice has not just been a voice that's mobilised before an election, but a voice that actually does change some of the things that the Australian government is responsible for. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Peter. Peter has tirelessly led this campaign nationally. As you can see, he's passionate, good ex-South Australian, and it's always great to have Peter in town because he certainly is living and breathing this with his team. You know, in this state we've got 30,000 businesses that employ less than 5 people. We've got 46,000 businesses that employ less than 20 people. And quite often when we hear iconic names that we see in the papers, we assume they're big businesses. Well, the next 2 speakers who we're really pleased to have coming along are well known in their industries, but they are small employers. And they're a part of this small business, small to medium-sized enterprise sector that we're talking about this morning. So it's with great pleasure I welcome now Sam Clark of Thorn Clark Wines. Sam's CEO of Thorn Clark, who's had a Thorn Clark wine, yeah, it's good. So I particularly like the sparkling. That's sort of a hint, Sam, but anyway. Sam has a background in accountancy, and prior to joining the family business, he worked in the resources industry. Over his time at Thorn Clark Wines, the business has developed into one which has a strong export focus. We're just chatting about, you know, life in China. It's hard selling things in China, but that's what you've got to do to create export markets. And they've got branded sales into 20 markets around the world, yet they've only got 24 staff. And this is the power of small businesses. You know, these aren't big payrolls. These aren't big infrastructure. These are small businesses creating export markets. He lives and works in the Barossa, but spends obviously time travelling a lot. Sam, let's welcome him as he comes this morning. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Nigel. That's a very, very nice introduction. I guess I don't get out of the bed this early in the morning most days. And certainly nothing I'm doing is actually work at that time of day, but generally I'm walking out of the Stanford Grand with, after enjoying a few meals and drinks with customers. I think last time I was here with about 10 of our Japanese customers who, I'm happy to say, bought about $1 million worth of Australian or South Australian wine more particularly. And it's always a joy to come back and talk about something that I think is very, very important to all of us. As Nigel just said, I'm actually from a corporate background, so as we've just been speaking about then, hearing Peter, he's come from that end of town as well. And I came back to my family business after spending a bit of time with Rio Tinto, and it certainly became very apparent to me immediately of just how small business focused the wine industry is. And, many of us who think about wine think about Penfolds, Jacobs Creek and others, but wine is actually 2,500 wineries around Australia, and many of them are very, very small businesses. So, when you think of the context of South Australia, many of these businesses are generational businesses. They're employing quite a small number of people, normally mum and dad and maybe a son or a daughter. And they're value-adding businesses as well. They're things that actually, businesses as such that go out, bottle of wine, export it, generate quite a lot of income for this state. And also, as a business, wineries generate a lot of tourism. So when you think about coming to South Australia as a tourist, you think about Kangaroo Island. The second most visited place in South Australia is Barossa. So there's a lot of positives that we need to have out there about wineries in South Australia particularly. It's something we should be very proud of. And the thing I like about wineries, particularly when I go up to China, is that you go to China and get the cheapest Rolex watches in the world. You can also get any number of things quite cheaply there, but when you think about wine, it can't be copied. You can't copy Barossa. You can't copy South Australia. And that's something that means we've got longevity in our business. We've got sustainability. So when I agreed to come along today, the thing that I really wanted to harp on about, I guess, from the podium was really, when you think about too big to ignore, what we should be thinking about is how do we grow these 2,500 wineries, which are very small. The top 10 are huge, as you probably well imagine, but the rest of them are quite small. How do we grow them from being small businesses to medium-sized business to large businesses? And it's not an easy transition, because in wineries, it's a very capital-intensive business. So, for instance, when I started back in '97 in the family business, I had to grapple with the transition from, at that stage, and probably a lot of you would remember, the boom industry of the time, the 90s, late 90s particularly, was wine. And we went, as a family business, having 50 acres of vineyard to 670 acres of vineyard over the space of 3 or 4 years. And so one of the first hurdles I hit, and as a young accountant you might think I'd know this, but I wasn't that aware of payroll tax. I hadn't had to deal with it at Rio Tinto. That wasn't my part of the accountancy. And so I remember we went from having about 1 employee in '97 to having about 40 at one stage through 98, 99, 2000. And I got a letter from Revenue SA saying, by the way, you just breached the cap on payroll and you owe us a lot of money. And that for a small business is a bit of a slap in the face. It's not actually what you should be focusing on. If you're trying to develop and you're spending millions of dollars doing it, as we did, develop vineyards, you should not be thinking about, well, hang on, how much have I spent this month or this quarter or this year? And it's one of those traps, I think, and it's always those sort of issues that come up, it seems, in small business as to when you're going to trip over a next little pitfall that you as an operator, an owner-operator, where you're working pretty long hours, that you need to be thinking of. And the other thing that I came across as part of that development phase is we started growing our own winery assets starting in the 2000s, early 2000s. We put an application with the council. Now, the Barossa Council, hopefully not two members here, but even though they're meant to be pro-winery, they are very, very strict on actually approving wineries in the Barossa, which does sound very unusual. And they put a lot of caveats, and one of the caveats they put on me when we were putting a project together to expand our fermentation capacity, which is not a small spend, it's going to cost us somewhere between $3 and $4 million to do this expansion, but we're willing to do it, willing to take the risk. This is all pre-GFC, mind you, so they were in brighter days. And the caveat they put on me was that they essentially had to seal the public road access to my front door. And now, we're able to absorb that. We're big enough to sustain that. But for many businesses I've heard of, they get that letter back from the council saying, by the way, Development Approval Board's looked at this and these are the conditions we wish to put on it. Well, a lot of them walk away. A lot of them say, well, why should I spend, in my case, about $130,000 sealing a road that I can't own? I can't put a toll on it, unfortunately, although I'd love to. Those sort of issues are actually stopping business decisions being made. And really, infrastructure, as much as... well, the way I think about infrastructure, certainly a local area, infrastructure has to be actually funded by local councils, and local councils aren't able to fund roads in that sort of way. They're just not. So I think we need to have a think about infrastructure, particularly going forward, and it's just an issue that it will not go away. If we don't develop infrastructure, you won't see businesses developing in South Australia. Now, I won't go on too much more, but I guess I was just trying to summarise quickly. I really think today should be about what should we be doing to ensure those small businesses that we've got out there, successful businesses. A lot of these businesses are very successful. I think of Henschke's, a fantastic family business. It would actually be smaller than Thorne Clark. But what are the incentives for someone like Henschke's, for instance, to go to the next level? There's not too many. If you think about it, if you're a very successful red wine producer selling Hill of Grace at $800 a bottle, why would you want to get bigger and employ more people? And a lot of the things I've just mentioned are actually stopping those decisions being made. I think we need to make that easier for people such as the Henschkes and others, many other businesses, to say, well, yeah, actually, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to grow my business. And that's, I think, what Too Big to Ignore is all about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sam. That's great. And it's good to hear from somebody from the regions as well. Our final speaker before we go to the panel, and we want to hear from you guys today. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we did ask several women running businesses to get up and speak. It does look a bit blokey up here, my apologies. But it's the whole story, you know, that whole line about if a woman's got 9 out of 10 of the capabilities for a job, she won't go for it, and if a bloke's got one of the capabilities, he'll say, I'm ready for the job. I don't know whether you've heard that story, but apparently it's not just urban legend. So it's us blokes up here today, but I can assure you, next time we have anything like this, there will be some very dynamic women up here. So if you're in the room and we do give you a call and say, hey, would you like to speak, please say yes, because, you know, it'd be good to hear from you. No reflection, of course, on the wonderful speakers here today. And the next one, of course, is Andrew Woskett. Andrew is Managing Director of Minotaur Exploration Limited, once again a well-known player in our resources sector, but only employing 20 staff. So quite often we think of resources companies as big, but most of our resources companies in this state are small. But it's ASX listed, and with over 30 years of industry experience, Andrew has project managed numerous mining landmarks, including start-up development of the Kalgoorlie Super Pit, major expansions of the Bougainville copper mine, development of the first modern underground gold mine at Ballarat, and operations in iron ore and coal. But currently, Andrew's running what we hope to be a very successful small business. Andrew, thank you. Welcome.
I must admit that I was a little bit stunned when Rick asked me to come here and talk to everybody. Immediately I couldn't see the relevance of what we had to do with the sort of businesses that all of you people here are involved in. And then it dawned on me that ourselves and most of the other companies in the mining and the mineral sector are indeed small businesses. So when that realisation struck, I thought, yes, this is a good opportunity perhaps to share with you some of the issues that we address in the mining industry, which are very similar to the issues that you confront yourselves. And in terms of getting a lady to speak next time, Nigel, I've got a nomination. Nerily, you're it. Next time. Nerily runs a fantastic small business, did some brilliant work for Minotaur at the end of last year when we moved into our new office, and we're very, very pleased with the quality of the work and the dedication and the professionalism Nerily and her team displayed. Thanks, Nerily. So I would like to thank the Chamber for the opportunity, and thank you very much for taking some time to let me share some thoughts with you. I'm going to argue this case that South Australia does depend on small business for its future minerals prosperity. And to do that, I'll quickly paint an image for you of what the minerals resources sector, and particularly the exploration sector, is like in this state. Now here we hear lots about the big gorillas in the mining industry, such as BHP and Arium, but we don't hear much, and not much profile attaches to the small sector, the small business sector, which are really the future mine developers in this state, and in fact the future developers of prosperity. In fact, it's fair to say that South Australia really flies under the radar, and has flown under the radar for a long time, as a state with an expanding mining sector. Surprisingly, that's even despite the fact, even despite the fact that South Australia is the birthplace of the iron ore industry. Some of you will know, of course, that iron ore mining started on the Middleback Ranges. We don't hear a huge amount about iron ore mining apart from the little bit that we hear about Arium. But nonetheless, South Australia is still home to 30% of the world's known uranium reserves, or known uranium deposits. And it's got huge potential to realise the new mines of the near and distant future. But that potential is really not that well appreciated. it doesn't get as much airtime as it perhaps deserves. South Australia, and the reason I say that is South Australia has arguably the most prospective rocks anywhere in the world for major copper-gold deposits such as Olympic Dam, and it's got extensive iron ore formations that stretch from Port Lincoln to Whyalla to Coober Pedy and all the way across to Broken Hill. It's got uranium, it's got mineral sands, it's got a bunch of other minerals, and the list can go on. Most mineral discoveries will inevitably be made by small explorers. That's just a fact. These are typically small businesses like ours that deploy shareholder risk capital in the search for the next big mineral deposit. Frankly, more often than not, that exercise, that searching and expenditure, results, however, in the small business getting even smaller. Because the cash flows out, no cash flows in, and the market valuation shrinks accordingly. Now, contrary to the premise that just about every other business in this room would be constructed on, being a sound commercial business, explorers usually have no cash flow, no revenue, other than cash flow out, and they merely accumulate losses or capitalised exploration expenditure, which turns into losses as they impair those expenditures at review time when their projects are deemed unsuccessful. That's why the business gets smaller. Now, you might well ask, and justifiably so, why on earth would you have a business model like that? It just doesn't seem to make sense. Well, the history of wealth creation through minerals discovery everywhere around the world is one that where fortune favours the brave. Investors brave enough to back entrepreneurial geologists and geoscientists who have the nous to convert theory into discovery success. And when that happens, the small explorer can realise orders of magnitude of value appreciation. And I'll give you a very classic example of very recent times. Sirius Resources from Western Australia, its value soared nearly 8,800% in a matter of several weeks on the back of its Nova nickel discovery. Now, that's value appreciation, creating a $1 billion small business. And it's axiomatic that small exploration outfits like Sirius and Minotaur are to where entrepreneurial people gravitate. They thrive in the flexible and nimble small business environment, defining where shareholder investment can be most effectively ploughed back into the ground, seeking the next mine discovery. However, like every other business here, no doubt, we decry the creeping cloak of government regulation, compliance, taxation burden, and particularly interventionist politics. In the exploration sector, at least 30% of exploration expenditure is directed towards red tape compliance and negotiating regulatory hurdles. 30%. It's a bit like taking a taxi ride and the fare goes to 30% before the wheels start turning. We can't sustain that sort of level of burden, and it is a big factor as to why exploration expenditure is reducing across Australia. It's not just the commodity price decline. No doubt many of you can relate to that and have similar stories of your own. So I think it's high time that governments acknowledge that business does not exist to serve the bureaucracy. Were governments to make good on their many, many promises to reduce green tape and red tape, that alone would provide an immediate stimulus to business growth and confidence. So others here, well, we've already heard a little bit about infrastructure, and I'll just touch on it briefly. Infrastructure in the mining industry is, I guess, a little bit different to the sort of infrastructure that most small businesses rely upon. You know, we particularly need rail, port, ships, power, water, and it is an impediment in this state in particular to the development of new projects. But I'm not going to stand here and say that governments have to supply that sort of infrastructure. It's really up to the miners to promote the investment attraction case and to justify the need for infrastructure of that nature. I don't really subscribe to the chicken and egg sort of attitude as to why the government should do it so we can build the project. I don't think that's relevant, and I think that recent examples of companies justifying new port development, for example, on the Eyre Peninsula, are good examples of where good projects will attract the investment for the infrastructure that's required. I'm much more concerned that as a society we remain open for small business in the mineral sector, and in this state and elsewhere we see growing antipathy to even low-level exploration activity. Land is becoming increasingly isolated from exploration through new conservation zones and political overreaction to pressure points. We have to ensure as a society that land access to minerals is not unduly diminished through legislative reform, social activism, land rights, ambit native title claims, populist politics in particular, and we're seeing that in spades at the moment, and so on. And as an example, look at the history, or the recent history, of land agitation against access for coal seam gas exploration in New South Wales and Queensland, which potentially denies those states the benefit of a viable energy resource. As a country, we're not so rich and sophisticated as a society either that we can afford to obstruct commercially and environmentally sound resource projects, as risk capital will flow to the least risk jurisdiction. South Australia in particular is yet to enjoy its minerals growth phase, and we must ensure that that is not forsaken due to excessive regulation, over-taxation and bureaucratic burden. In South Australia, we do have some of the most experienced, capable and successful resource sector explorers and developers. We have some of the most prospective rocks in the world, as I said, and we have a sector mainly populated by small business whose potential is clearly too big to ignore. And just in closing, a word to my sponsor. You know, Minotaur is a small exploration company, but we do operate across every mainland state of Australia. And so as a small business with, albeit only 20 people and the support of a number of contractors, we do spread ourselves reasonably well around the continent. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. It just reminds me, I quite often talk to politicians on all sides of governments and various levels and public sector people, and they say, look, Nigel, we just want to get out of the way of business. We just want to get right out of the way of business and let business grow. And I say, well, that's fabulous, but can you take your 800-pound gorilla with you? And that's the 800-pound gorilla of tax, you know, incredible red tape, and just things that both of these speakers have talked about. You know, payroll tax is a punishment for employing people. It's just a ridiculous tax. It shouldn't exist, and we've got to have fundamental tax reform. So I'm just going to throw a few questions to the panel simply to warm you guys up, because this is about you, and we're going to have a roving mic going around in a minute. But I just want to ask a couple of Dorothy Dixes, and I might start with you, Sam, if I may. You mentioned, you know, you rose to the heady heights of, in the good days, of 40 people, you're way back down. You know, what would make it easier for you to put some more people on? Because I know the regions desperately need employment, and what would make a difference for you to find, you know, to put people on, whether it be apprentices, trainees, or whoever?
It's a bit of a hard question to answer just on purely on regulation or on the points we've got here, because of course the biggest things hit the wine industry in the last 4 or 5 years has been the Australian dollar. Now everyone in the room understands the huge impact that's had on us as a business. We were at the time, say for Thorn Clark, just as a pure case study, from 2002 to about 2006, 2007, 80% of our sales were going to the USA, and I'm quite happy to say at good margins. And Shiraz was flavour of the day, and Australian wine was flavour of the day. So that certainly when that's come off, it's made it hard for us to justify employing more people just on the current terms, I'd say. The things that have certainly struck me when we hit the GFC was that the cost of making people, I know it's not answering the question directly, but the cost of actually making people redundant was a huge problem for us because, look, I know people don't like talking about it, but the structure of the business had changed.
Yeah.
We dropped something like $3 million worth of revenue in the space of 12 months.
Yeah.
From I think it was about $9 to $10 million down to about $7 million.
Yeah.
We went to the red in a big way, and we had to make people redundant. Of course, if you look at the law, it says basically you've got to make your first in, first out rule apply in this case, because that's essentially who you can afford to get rid of almost. So I think if you're looking at employing people, I like to think in the terms of the ease of both bringing them in, but also if things don't work out, at least having an option to say, look, this just hasn't worked.
Well, you're right. It's extraordinarily expensive when you have to, because of forces beyond your control, restructure your business. And people think about that when they go to employ somebody. What if I have to, in a couple of years' time, lay somebody off, which is terrible. Nobody wants to do that, because sometimes you face those problems, and it is incredibly expensive, and quite often it can be something that leads to, industrial action or whatever it might be. So it's a minefield. But thanks for that. Andrew, you mentioned the taxi. I love the analogy of the taxi. You have to sit there and for the first, $30 on the clock before the wheels start turning. Obviously, compliance is a huge issue in your industry. I mean, how do you do it with 20 people? Have you got a full-time compliance person, or do you do it? I mean, who does it in your business?
Well, sadly, I've got to say, Nigel, we employ a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, yeah.
And, the fact is...
No lawyers in the room.
Well, I mean, honestly, some industries got to win out of this.
Well, that's right. The fact is that there's very little you can do in terms of combating the bureaucracy to move your projects through approval stages without employing a raft of lawyers to assist in the project or even partly manage the project. In particular, in this state, it's a real concern around native title negotiations, and this is not a comment directed at the native title claimants in any way. It's more a comment directed at the bureaucracy which has been created to look after, if you like, the rights of the native title claimants, and that bureaucracy is run by white lawyers who are funded by the taxpayer, and the hurdles that they put up are just ridiculous. And unfortunately, the government, the bureaucracy here is somewhat intimidated, I think, a little bit by the power of that advisory group, and they're continually changing the rules that we have to operate under, which just makes it harder and harder and harder to get approvals.
That's right. I mean, one of the problems is not just the regulation, it's how the goalposts changed a lot. We've seen that recently. We've seen policy on the run. We've seen FPT changes, which are going to affect a lot of industries. Peter, you've been all over the country talking to small business. I know it's a really hard question, but what is that one recurring thing? I know we've got the big four. We've heard that a lot. Is there one thing that comes out consistently that kind of sticks in your mind as you've spoken to small businesses across the country?
It's confidence. Small business people naturally want to be confident. They're entrepreneurs, they're enterprising. They want to succeed, they've got business plans that they think create pathways to succeed. Yeah. The most common message from around the country is that they don't want the government to make their business successful, but they want the government to be on their side sufficiently to allow them to be confident about implementing their business plans. Yeah. So, whether it's employing people, whether it's actually securing some additional finance, going deeper into overdraft, they want to feel as if that their confidence can be reciprocated by the way in which government acts. Not to make their business successful, because they will succeed or fail based on their enterprise, but they do not want governments to simply regard them as cash cows and to disrespect their enterprise and assume that they're going to be able to cope with more and more compounding regulation. And I think that is a very common message. And I think we need to get back to the basics, that they know they can actually do some good things in the community, They're very community-minded, not just business-minded, most small business people, but they actually don't feel as if there's the right sort of relationship with the way in which the default proposition of government is, which is to keep regulating, keep taxing, one bureaucracy putting in place regulation without thinking about what it means for the whole. And at the top of governments, there needs to be some change thinking.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I did say recently in Australia we're blessed with 3 tiers of government and 3 tiers of regulation, 3 tiers of taxation and cost, and that's an enormous impost on small business. I'm going to treat you, ladies and gentlemen, this morning as a bit of a broader panel, and we've got a raving mic somewhere. Somebody wants to wave at me with a mic or gesticulate somewhere. Oh, can somebody grab? Here she comes. By the way, Melissa is carrying the cards, and there is a fantastic iPad here, so please make sure your card's in that. I want to treat you guys as a panel. I want to ask a couple of things about the tax system. So in the state tax system, we'd like to change a few things. Of the taxes and charges in our state tax system, payroll tax, work cover levy, stamp duty, land tax, if you could abolish one of those taxes, why would you do it? Which one would you pick and why? Please just jump in, and we've got a mic down here, or stand up, or wave your hand, or nod forward, slump on the table. We'll take that as a yes. Yes, down the back. Thank you, sir.
The points you bring up are interesting. The one in particular is the stamp duty tax.
Yeah.
We had a need to transfer a business property into one of our other companies, which was owned by the same people, and we had an enormous stamp duty tax to pay to transfer one of our properties into one of our other businesses, which just seems ridiculous. It doesn't serve any social purpose except further tax gathering, and it inhibits the business in being able to make best benefit of where it holds its assets within its own companies.
Yeah, no, good point. Thank you. Any other somebody who's got a favourite state tax they'd like to talk about and the impact on your business? Payroll tax. How many people are above the threshold, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah, so many of you aren't. That's good. It's good that the threshold, you're below that threshold. Yeah, that's the other good question. How many people actually intentionally chose to stay below the tax threshold for payroll tax? Yeah, there'd be a few, and who would blame you? As soon as you click over, it's a real problem. One of the great things that have come out as we've gone around, and Peter's gone around, is the sense of confidence to be able to go out and employ somebody. Why would you do that when you hit a threshold that starts to punish you seriously in terms of taking a burden at a time? Whereas you say, you're taking a risk to employ somebody, it's then incurring a cost if you hit a payroll tax threshold, and if you then have to restructure later because the risk that you took turned out to be in good faith but you couldn't continue that, then you face the cost and the risk of obviously letting that person go. So it's a bit of a triple whammy in many ways. In terms of federal taxes, thank you for the response on that. Nothing surprises me there because I've been out and about, and people find work cover levy payments really high. How many people just got are now facing higher payments in this last year? Yeah, just stick up your hands. They say there's about 35% of employers are facing that. Those are serious costs that are a burden on small business, and we're working as well. While it's not directly a tax, it's a cost of doing business. In terms of federal taxes, we know there's company tax, obviously the impact of the carbon tax, and the superannuation contribution levy, which we know is slated to increase up to 12% in coming years. And if you're an employee, it's very hard when your employer says to you, "Good news, Nigel, you're going up to 12%. That is great, but you don't sort of see it in your account, but the employer's got to pay it. So there's another double whammy there because people want extra money in their pay packet, but they don't see the 12% that's got to be paid. Now, we're happy that, as I think Peter suggested before, there's going to be a deferral, we hope, of that. If there is a change of government, that's a direct recognition of how much of a pain this is. I'll go by kind of hands. How many people really would find going to 12% in your superannuation guarantee levy quite a struggle for your employees? It's quite a significant amount, number. Thanks for that, and thanks for not sticking your hand up if you don't feel that's the case. I mean, we actually want honest responses here. If you feel you can cope with that, that's great. It means your business is doing well, but many businesses are finding that quite a thing. How many people really believe carbon tax has affected their business by way of a multiplier in terms of cost, power, things like that? Yeah, that's a pretty good number. Some businesses and some industries are more affected than others. And the other one, probably the big one, many of you won't be in companies. Many people. How many people are actually in PTY companies here? Quite a few. Okay, that's interesting. And how many would say that company tax and the way it's structured probably isn't helping you grow your business at the moment? Yeah, there'd be a few. We need to get tax down. The one thing that we're saying is, certainly as Business South Australia, is that we believe that you'll never get state governments off the addiction of these state taxes without a fundamental federal change in tax, and we're going to be lobbying for that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, any questions at all? Comments, thoughts? Yes, down the front here. Thank you. Please. Yeah, Peter, do you want to elaborate on that? Thanks.
Yeah, the small business access to finance has been quite a important issue, particularly since the global financial crisis. There's an instinctive view amongst a lot of small business people that they do want government to do something to try and help in that regard. The tricky question is exactly what should government be doing, because we don't particularly want governments to be in the space of actually setting up banks and actually being the provider of finance. So you need to actually create some greater competition inside the existing banking sector so that there's better flows of finance into SMEs. But you do have the capacity for governments, at least for a temporary period of time, to provide some mechanisms with the support of the banking industry for greater flow of finance. And there have been small business credit finance arrangements established in a number of other countries, Canada, the United Kingdom. They haven't been trialled in Australia, or we haven't seen the need to do so. But this side of the financial crisis, the general view is that it would be worth the Australian government exploring exactly how it can do so. The benefit of that is that it puts pressure on the banking and the finance industry to provide small business people with a fairer deal. That even if government doesn't ultimately set up some mechanisms for credit flow for some SMEs, the mere fact that government is saying we have the power to do something in that space is likely to improve some of the behaviours of the major financial institutions. So we ultimately want the private financial institutions to provide a better deal, and if it requires some action by government, either threatened or actual, then that's the path we'll go down.
It's a great question, because one of the great issues has been access to facilities to grow businesses, and the banks say that they're open for business, but either the cost or the compliance requirements going through it are very high, or they're not indeed open. If you talk to any small to medium-sized manufacturer, typically the banks will admit that they're not interested in lending into those sectors. And I won't ask people to put their hands up, because that's a bit more private about whether or not your bank's been good to you or not. But I've got to say, talking to people across the state, there's a real issue about genuine access to affordable finance to actually grow your business. And often when you're through the very times when you need some access to finance, that's the time when you're not going to get it. Those are great questions. Any other questions and comments around? Please jump. Oh, sorry, somebody down there. Yes, thank you.
Francis from Small Business and Deputy Innovation Consulting. I'm just wondering what Business SA's message to major parties will be coming up in the next election, specifically about what you think they should be doing to support small business.
Yeah, that's a perfectly on point. We've run the Big Four for a reason, because we believe it actually is a common theme. So when we get out there, it doesn't matter, as Peter said, whether you're in manufacturing or retail, or whatever it is, and every sector in between, it does come down to those four key themes. Are you talking about the federal election or the state election?
The state election.
State election, right.
And putting aside the tax review.
Yes.
And putting aside a high voltage power lines.
Yeah. Which is important if you're in the Eyre Peninsula, but probably not here this morning. Yes, we'll be bringing out a charter later which picks up everything from genuine public sector reform and public sector cost reform. So let me start with what I think is one of the elephants in the room, which is we spend nearly $7 billion a year in a small state on our state public servants. I'm not anti-public sector, but frankly, what the government will say to you is that of their total budget, they believe only 3% of their total annual budget is discretionary. So it's very, very hard to create tax breaks for payroll tax and to reduce it, which we believe is a tax on jobs. It's very, very hard to actually create an environment where we grow the economy by, it's not only just infrastructure, down the Eyre Peninsula, but roads and everything else that we're behind the eight ball on, when you simply have so much money tied up in public sector cost. And once again, I'm not anti-public sector, neither is Business SA, but we simply can't afford $6.9 billion a year paying public servants in a state that has 3 tiers of government and we've got 1.5 million people. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, it just doesn't, the maths don't work. So if you start with that, you say, unless we change government spending, unless we make it more efficient, because part of the problem we've got with regulation is not just the impost on small businesses in this room, it's the cost of administering it. So every time you create a regulation, you create public servants who have to administer it, you create departments. And I heard the other day we've got some extraordinary number, 68 public sector agencies in a state of 1.5 million people. I was in Tasmania a couple of weeks ago for a quick break, lovely place, and I got on the plane with my wife and I said, lovely place, shame about the economy. And I worried about people coming to Adelaide and getting on the plane to fly where they were flying and say, fantastic place, what an amazing, fifth most livable city in the world, but pity about the economy. And I go down, whether it's Jetty Road or whether it's King William Road, and I see the for lease signs up, and I see the unemployment stuff going up, and we simply have a government at the moment, we're apolitical, but I need to call it what it is, that we will not see a change in our taxation arrangements on small business unless we see a change in public sector spending. We've got to shift it to saying, do we need that regulation? We tend to, in regulation, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And what we're saying to government is, can we try self-regulation? Can we try light regulation? Do we have to have a regulatory regime for everything in our state when you've got 3 tiers of government? So we'll start with public sector reform. We'll look at, obviously, taxation reform, because that's critical, and by that I mean taking the monkey off the back with payroll tax and stamp duty and land tax, and the things that we hear from small business are crippling. Stamp duty is basically a tax on transactions. It's a tax on economic growth and economic activity. And then we go through a whole range of things through to infrastructure. There's about, I'll give me a card and I'll make sure we send you the charter. There's about an hour's worth that we could talk about. It's not negative. Sometimes, the problem in being in a role like this is you get up and it's a call to action. You've got to talk about what's not happening. What we want to see is what Peter has talked about. We want to create an atmosphere of absolute confidence in the state. We do need to recreate confidence. People aren't hiring when they could hire because they're not confident about the future. We want to have a sense of direction in the state, a sense of vision, and we'll be putting that to both sides of politics, and we'll be asking them not to get up and embrace world peace. Anybody can do that, but we'll be putting specific policies to them and say, do you embrace a reduction, in payroll tax to this level or not? Just say. Because everybody will get up and say, oh, we embrace red tape reform and tax reform. I mean, every politician will get up and say that. We're going to put a series of very specific proposals to both sides of politics and get them to debate it. Thanks for the question. It's good though. Yes, thanks. Narrowly, isn't it? Yes. We should have had you up here. Come on. Yeah, sorry. We've got a mic there. Sorry, it is a big room. Marissa's jogging towards you.
I'm Nerily Hutchinson from Studio Tonic. As Andrew mentioned, we did their fit out when they recently moved to new premises. We work in design, but we also obviously deal with construction. So we're complying with a lot of interesting and different things in building, even though we don't pick up a hammer, as you can probably tell how I'm dressed. We pick up the pen and then we direct everyone else to pick up the hammer and everything else.
That's right.
So, but for government compliance, for us, we're the first interior design firm to get government pre-qualification. That was really, really hard. But we're trying to get in so we can make some changes. So I'd like to talk to you about that.
Great.
Separately. Yep. But also the new health and safety rules that are coming in from a federal level.
Yeah.
Just nasty.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely nasty, particularly for us when we go onto sites, even if they're an empty lease. You know, someone's wanting us to check out where they're going to go into their new office. We have to fill out a number of forms just to go to the car, and then fill another form to get in the car, another form to drive to the place, and another one to go into an empty office and turn on a light. So you're talking about just JSCAs and things like that, just getting absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
To walk out of the office.
Yeah.
So I hate to think whether there's only a few of us. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Thanks Nerily. I spoke to one of our members the other day who said they've got a full-time in-house lawyer and a full-time in-house WHS compliance person. I said, wow, how big are you? He said 80 employees. And that's the cost. And and of course the penalties are very onerous. We believe in safety. None of us want Australians to get injured at work, but we don't believe filling in paperwork is going to stop injuries. We think it's actually going to probably, hopefully not, but cause them, because you're so focused on getting the paperwork filled in, you're not watching what's happening. We know that safety is about culture at work. It's about vigilance, and we have a real problem with, as you say, that particular piece of legislation in every code. Yes. Thanks. Marissa?
Hello, good morning. Teresa Hines, Employer Global Solutions, Occupational Health and HR Specialist.
You might need to hand your card out today.
I'm not going to take it personally. Firstly, I want to congratulate everyone here because you've survived the GFC so far, and many businesses haven't. Yep. So I think that that's come back to our business acumen and how business savvy we are, and I think we need to congratulate ourselves on that first.
Good. Yeah.
So I'd like to do
well
that.
Done.
I come from a corporate background. I won the 2011 Telstra Businesswoman of the Year award. My background's predominantly mining. And on the back of that, I decided to launch off into my own small business, and I now have 5 staff and about 5 contractors. So we're progressing quite well. But what I wanted to really talk about this morning, I deal with a lot of companies in industrial, mining, construction, and what I find ridiculous is that we don't specify the requirement of the government and some of the larger companies to use South Australian businesses. So I have lots of companies who are going for tender development or for tenders. I'm helping them do that. They've got great tenders there. Some of them get them, some of them don't. But they're quite often pipped at the post by clients in the eastern states. And I think as a South Australian government, we've got to do something about that. That's just ridiculous to me.
That's a really good point, and thank you for making it. Many of you will know, if you've read anything I've written, that this government spends nearly $4 billion a year on services and goods. We're saying it's an absolute no-brainer that you should be parochial and one-eyed and actually spend it on South Australian taxpayers and businesses. We know that there have been barriers to entry for small business. So small versus large, local versus interstate. For some reason, it seems to be more sexy to hire somebody from interstate. It must be the wise men from the east then. But we've lobbied to form a thing called the Industry Participation Advocate, Ian Nightingale, and that's now been created. And that's a positive person who goes in to actually say to government agencies, why aren't you allowing small business in South Australia into these tenders? What are you doing to change that? So we've really worked very, very hard to get that created. We're now working to get it staffed and resourced. We're now working to get it with some teeth to require government agencies to actually explain why they haven't made sure that particularly small businesses in South Australia get a shot. We're already starting to see that change now, but you're absolutely right. For years, you would assume that there was some kind of leprosy on small business in South Australia when it came to government contracts. And frankly, for a mid-level procurement person in the public sector, it's easier just to give it to an interstate prime and say, there you go, I'm not going to get fired for buying IBM. It's a lot more inconvenient to have to deal with a panel of small businesses and work out how we're going to do that. The other thing we're going to do is change ridiculous requirements like, why do you need $50 million in public liability insurance for a job that size? It's just ridiculous. So we are working on the processes now. We have got this office formed. We continue to lobby for it. And I said to Jim Halley, and Rick and I meet with the Premier's, head of the Premier's department quite often, I said, think about it, Jim, it's a no-brainer. First of all, you support small business and therefore you keep unemployment down in this state. Secondly, it's a vote catcher because you're actually out there supporting South Australians. And thirdly, mate, you're increasing your tax base. So you're recycling the money. When it goes to New South Wales or Victoria, you don't tax it. You're not getting any revenue out of a growing economic base. Why not grow your economic base here by spending in this state? It's just an absolute logical no-brainer. So we are working hard on that. It's begun. The cracks are appearing, and we're hoping that we'll see some real action. Some of the, if you talk to Ian Nightingale, I meet with him pretty regularly. He's very, very committed. Didn't believe the stories I told him about how bad it was out there, how businesses couldn't complain because there'd be payback. And he came back and he said, if anything, you're understanding it, Nigel. I understand the problem. So we've got that started, but it's got a long way to go. I'm acutely aware of time. Is there one last question? Burning question? Yes, down the front.
Not a lot has been spoken about rising utility costs.
So I'll just repeat this when you're finished, because I'll let them know what I'm saying. Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Not a lot has been spoken about rising utility costs, in particular electricity, which I think is really stifling, particularly the manufacturing sector in this state. What can we do? What can be done? What's going to be done about trying to curb or reduce that insane increase in power and energy costs?
Yeah, utility costs have been very high. Some of the highest water costs in the world, highest electricity costs. Local panel members, any thoughts on bombing Escosa or?
Well, just a bit of an anecdotal story. Since the dollar became so strong, a lot of packaging, a lot of manufacturing in the wine industry has gone offshore. So if you're still trying to meet, say in the UK context, trying to meet a £5.99 a bottle price point, and your costs have suddenly gone up, as they have, only from exchange point, not only just the exchange rate point of view, but also from an electricity, water, everything point of view, what people are doing now is they're shipping the wine offshore in bladders, bottling in Bristol, and selling it to the supermarkets. So what we've managed to do by making our costs so expensive, we've exported a lot of jobs. So Treasure Wine Estates, who are former Fosters, so Penfolds, Wolf Blass and others. The guys down at Ranella, Accolade, forgot about them. Used to be Constellation. They're doing the same thing. It seems like a crazy situation. If we're going to make ourselves competitive, we've got to address utility costs. It's an absolute must, I agree.
They're very high. I've talked to the electricity industry about this. In fact, we've got somebody on our board who's in the electricity industry, and he said the problem is this, that it's a completely deregulated market now, effectively. And when the government of old sold the infrastructure, it was billions of dollars short of maintenance. So what happened was the assets were sold in very poor condition. In his particular area, which is the high voltage grid, they put in $1.5 billion in capital to keep it up. And this is the other flip side. So walk a mile in his moccasins, only perhaps 2 minutes in his moccasins, but the regulator said if you don't keep peak demand at all times 24/7, you can be fined $1 million a day. So do we need peak demand 24/7? We don't. So we have to look at the whole regulatory system and say, why is it so expensive? It's easy to look at the utilities themselves and say, well, why are you so expensive? Well, they're going to say we're putting billions into infrastructure that was left for years without any upgrades, and we've got to meet these extraordinary regulatory requirements. Why don't we look at those regulatory requirements? Why wouldn't industry say, we don't need that, we don't need to pay for it, so let's bring it back? So that's a complex area, but it's one that is killing manufacturing, as you say, Sam. It's killing a lot of business, and it's something that even at a personal level, a few quarters ago, I got my household power bill. I don't have solar or anything like that, and I live up in the hills, and I was kind of in the sort of fetal position in the corner for a while, just looking at the bill. It was just extraordinary. Looking forward to eating after that quarter had been gone by. Ladies and gentlemen, I know. Oh, one. Have you got one, mate?
Yeah, no. I suppose directed to our two panellists, and in relation to confidence. I mean, we've talked about over-regulation and cutting red tape, but do you guys have any advice, or are there any things that you've implemented to be more efficient, so you can therefore be more competitive?
That's a mic, mate. You just That's the talking stick. Stu's one of our staff. What he's asking is, can you ask it again because people couldn't hear it?
I suppose in relation to confidence, and we've talked about over-regulation, cutting red tape. From a holistic perspective, have you implemented anything, or do you have any advice in relation to how you can be more efficient, so you can therefore be more competitive in this current climate?
The wine industry is not an easy one to move. We have a very, very fixed cost structure. So we're basically a vertically integrated business. So from the vineyard all the way through to the winery to the bottling hall, there aren't too many costs you can cut out. It's not an easy thing. So we've looked at obviously headcount, as I mentioned earlier, and we have trialled bottling overseas. I'm happy to admit that. Those sort of things we've done. We've looked at the way our blends are done, so how much maturation you might give to a wine, for instance. So the struggle you have is essentially, say you've got a case of wine that's selling for 100 and it's costing you 50. That might have been 100 US. Now that 100 US might suddenly now only be worth 80 or 70, and suddenly your margins shrunk. So essentially, we've had to cut things down from input cost point of view to ensure we keep our margin. So our cost might come back to 40. Okay, we're only getting 70, but still we've got a livable margin. So end of the day, as consumers, and as Australians, we all lose because I'm out there competing against the Spanish, the Italians, the French, etc., and they're making wine that's now cheaper than mine, which is probably now because Australia used to compete fantastically well in quality, fantastically well. Now we're sort of more on a level playing field, so that's where it comes out.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm acutely aware we said we'd have you out of here at 9, and I've failed. Now the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is I just want to say thank you so much for coming and for your time and interest. Remember, you can go online. Please do that. Add your voice. Let's get to that 100,000. That's a real milestone for small business and the voice of small business nationally. I have got some good news. Everybody's getting a door prize courtesy of the advertiser. It's a free advertiser on the way out. So those of you who don't pick up the iPad, can I just say there's so much you can get out of an advertiser, Chris, isn't that right? Now for the iPad thing. Thank heavens. We didn't have to lock the doors, did we, ladies and gentlemen? There's an iPad going. Looks very sexy and nice as well. And I'm digging deep, looking for that Braille symbol on my card. And the proud winner is from Rojo Printing, John Tregeagle. John, come on down. John. Is that a redraw? Must be. Yes, absolutely. Gee, you're a tough crowd. Somebody said John who? John. Anybody know John? Can you just tell him he missed out on an iPad? Is he in the toilet? No, he's gone. He's gone. Fair enough. Well, this is a fancy card. This is lovely. From Solution Forest, Dr. Lou. Yes, come on down. Dr. Lou, there's beady eyes of envy as you walk down there. So, hey, thanks for coming. Well done. Okay, now there's a $1,000 training voucher at Business SA, and I'm just coming, and that goes to Rojo Print. That was naughty. He's got John Tregeagle put 2 cards in, ladies and gentlemen. I think. Come on. Can somebody ring John and say, what's the luck? First of all, you didn't get the iPad. Secondly, even though they're different colours, you put 2 cards in, John. Naughty John. He believes in karma now. Okay, $1,000 voucher goes to Rob Bridge from TradeStar. Rob, is Rob here? No? Okay.
He's gone as well.
And here's Rob's second card just coming now. Oops. Rachel Pope from Electrical Wholesalers. Rachel, congratulations. Don't come on down. We'll give it to you. Thank you. Finally, the gift certificate is to Talk Australia, Jamie Moore. So that's a nice night here at the accommodation of the Stanford Grand. Jamie, come on down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending. We do appreciate it. Sorry we've gone a little over time. Thank you to our panel. I'll give them their Hague chocolates in a minute. Peter flies all the way back for just the Hague's chocolates, mate, don't you? That's right. Can we thank our panel of speakers? Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. It's a glorious day outside, and we will see you soon. Cheers. Thank you.